entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
I don't know why you're here. Is that not why you're here? What's up, Steven Jerian? How's it going? And hello to everybody in Steve's chat. I was just over there a minute ago, so yeah, that's me. I'm upset with me, or Putsy says that Steven is upset with me. Is it because I didn't stream? I'm here to yell at you for not telling me you were about to start streaming. Oh, okay. I guess. So normally I stream at this time. But I mean, okay. I'm having a bit of an issue here with my camera, and I'm not sure exactly why. Because I've had to. Sorry about that. I've had to change my settings on this camera like every time that I've streamed for like the last 4 or 5 times that I've streamed, and that's kind of messed up. So I'm wondering why I'm having to do that. I guess there's maybe some default setting that I need to go change. But yeah, like every time I've come in, it's had the white balance all messed up, and I've had to go back in and change it again. But hello, everybody, and welcome in. Putsy is here. Welcome, Putsy. Matt is here. Hello. Adventura. Tad is here. Welcome. Stephen, I did not dip out quickly because I wanted you to not know that I was streaming. I dipped out quickly because I had completely lost track of time, and I wanted to say goodbye, but I also didn't have time to write like a long thing. So I just was like, I gotta go by. I did not have to take an immediate poo. No. What's up, Moose? Welcome. And hello, Claire. How are you all? Welcome in, everybody, to Adventures in History, where we talk about history and we make fun out of history, and sometimes we just make fun of history. But, you know, all of these things are more or less what we do here. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope that the world is treating you nicely. And we're going to talk about some politics stuff tonight. We are continuing with our series on the history of government and politics. And we are on issue number 11. We do make fun of me sometimes. I have a glowing aura around me. Yeah, that's the lights on the back wall make it look like I'm glowing. You need to go harass your dog about, or harass your parents about the dog, not your dog about your parents. Anyway. Stephen, thank you so much for the raid, though. If you all are not already following my friend Stephen and Jerry, and you really should, we have legal paperwork that says that we're friends. So you have to go follow him and watch him draw cool dragons and talk about stuff and listen to good music while it's going on. So I had hoped that by this point I would have shelves filling up the space behind me with a whole bunch of Gundam kits on it, but as you can tell, there are no shelves, and this is partially because Amazon messed up one of my orders. I ordered some stuff on Monday, and it was supposed to be here by today, and I was supposed to have all of this stuff put together. But I checked, and yesterday there was some hold on the order, and Amazon said that it wasn't going to ship at the right time because I hadn't paid for it the right way. Anyway, I got it straightened out yesterday. Now they're supposed to be here tomorrow. Of course, this isn't going to help me with stream tonight. I'm still sitting in front of a mostly blank wall. You can see little blue spots where I've marked out the studs in the wall so that I can hang shelves. But I don't have shelves yet to hang. So, alas and alack. And we will carry forward anyway because we are brave adventurers. And sometimes the adventure takes an interesting turn. At least the wheels are still on my vehicle. So, burn all their warehouses. Maybe not the best of ideas. But DCI Banks, what's going on? How are you? Hope you're well. Said hey to Tad. I think I got everybody. Yeah, so welcome in. And again, we're in this stream series here talking about politics and how government and politics have changed over time. And we're talking tonight especially about the Renaissance time period, picking up after our episode last week on medieval period developments with stuff like common law and constitutional monarchies. What's up, Rexler? I have painted the wall behind me. It used to be roughly the same color as my skin, and I looked like a sort of amorphous blob in front of it. Now you can tell the difference between me and the wall, but I still look like an amorphous blob. So, yeah. Adam is here. What's up? So, that's the goal, of course, is to build shelves and put all the Gundam stuff back up. I also have new lights coming in that are supposed to illuminate the back wall much more clearly. But yeah, the contrast is nice, and I'm in the process of trying to paint the whole room. It's been a little bit of a slow process because I'm trying to make sure that I don't get too high on the fumes, and I have to move a whole bunch of stuff around. It's not like I can just completely move everything out to do this, and then move everything back in for streaming, and then move everything back out for painting and such. The puppy is actually right behind me. You took apart a waterbed and got about 40 foot of shelves.
I'm Spartacus!
Kilted Preacher is
I'm
Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Is that sound doubling for you all? Spills can of latex paints on model kits. No, I haven't spilled paint on my model kits. I did drop my perfect grade, though. Well, technically I didn't drop it. I put it on a shelf, and then it fell off of the shelf, and I had to reconstruct it. Kilted Preacher, thank you so much for being Spartacus. Let me call the puppy. Kaylee, come here. There's the puppy. Hello. And the puppy does not have her cone on because she's being a good girl, right? And not licking on the leg. Except for the fact that the leg is a little bit damp. So maybe you were licking a little bit on the leg. Why were you licking on the leg, puppy? You're not supposed to be licking on the leg. That's a good girl. Oh yes. She was just before stream woofing at the neighbors who did, the mortal sin of like going outside. How dare they go outside? Oh, you get a puppy belch. I don't know if that picked up on the microphone or not. That's a good girl. She likes getting this part of her neck right here scratched. She can't reach that with her feet. So she likes getting this part right here scratched. Oh, yes. You gonna hang out with me? Okay, well, if you hang out with me, you can't lick your leg, alright? Yes, that is the puppy of war, our ever vigilant House Carl, who is now going to go up front and probably plop on the couch and go to sleep on the top of the pillow that I use on the couch because it's obviously her pillow. You two committed the mortal sin. You made a noise outside and a dog woofed at you. All right, so let's get into it and hit the ground with a bit of a catch-up. So as a reminder, this is an ongoing series, and unlike Adventures in History, which is sort of the main series that I've been doing for the last few years here on stream, this one does overlap quite a bit, and it does have a lot of callbacks to previous stuff. If you want to catch up with previous episodes, you can check out YouTube. The most recent one from last week is on a VOD here on Twitch. It should still be very close to the top of the list in Twitch. And we will pick up today looking at the Renaissance period. And one of the things that happens in the Renaissance period that is really important is that wealth becomes more easily obtained by more people. Now, let's be very clear here. We're not talking about a overwhelmingly powerful middle class, but we are talking about people that don't necessarily own large tracts of land being able to get money. And there are a lot of different ways that people during the Renaissance can get money. These are through things like doing art or trading or banking, which is a new thing that has sort of entered into the world around this time period. And there are going to be people that aren't the old landed gentry or the old nobility that are going to start getting power with this money. And this is going to start challenging our structures of government and changing the way that we do our politics. So that's what we're going to sort of be looking at tonight. And that's where we're going to come from. So catching up with chat real quick before we go. Your cat is staring at you. Cats do tend to stare. Existing outside the window you like to sit beside. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it is their window, right? It is their window. So again, at the end of the medieval period, the vast majority of our governments are going to be monarchies. And these monarchies are primarily going to be what we would call hereditary monarchies. And they are mostly not going to have any kind of constitutional structure. Most of the monarchs that are going to exist at the end of the medieval period are going to be more or less absolutists, meaning that they hold all of the power and they don't really answer to other people. But during this period of Renaissance, when things are shifting culturally and shifting economically, these monarchies are going to face challenges. And these challenges are going to come from nobility, and they're going to, in some cases, come from people that aren't even nobles, but have the same amount of money as a noble would. And the big question here is going to come down to the old marriage between military and government power, right? Again, this whole concept that we're talking about goes back to this idea of power. How do we use our power collectively? And for a very long time in the history of humanity, government and military power had been fused together. But stuff is going to start changing during this period of time when individuals that are not the kings are going to have enough money to support armies of their own. And that's, of course, going to start pretty dramatically changing the landscape of politics and government, because during the medieval period, if a king told you, you must do this, well, you had to go do that. And if you didn't do that, the king would always respond with, or I'll bring the military down on your head. And for a long period of time, these absolutist, very powerful monarchies are going to be able to use that threat very convincingly. But if I am now a mid-level noble, or perhaps one of the leaders of these big principalities or princedoms that we're going to talk about here in just a second, I might be able to say no. And if I can say no to the king, this changes government, because I'm now able to exercise power on my own, and the king is going to have to figure out how to handle that. What if I have a military that rivals or exceeds the crown's personal holdings? This is the good question here, right? What if the king as an individual sits on the throne and has a lot of loyalty directed towards him, but doesn't necessarily have a very big bank account? What if the bank account is sitting in the nobles' hands and the king is reliant on loyal nobles with lots of money to fight for his side and his family, while other nobles that don't necessarily want to fight for the king are going to be able to field their own armies? This is the big pushing point of monarchies. If you can't enforce your statement with physical threat or military power, you're going to have to use different kinds of power. You're going to have to use persuasive power. You're going to have to use, some points, religious power. You're going to start seeing a lot more appeals to the church that happen between kings and leaders of the Catholic Church, especially in Europe. You're going to start seeing people that are going to start saying not just no, but no, and I have friends that also say no. So for a king to stay on the throne during this period, you're going to have to see a change. You're going to have to see a shift. And this is not something that kings typically like. They don't like having to give up their power, but you're going to start seeing the growth of councils. You're going to start seeing the growth of advisory boards or parliaments or early versions of legislative assemblies. And the king is going to have to try to work with these nobles instead of purely working against these nobles. And this is going to be a really, really big deal. What's up, Chris? Welcome in. I will give you a ring of power, right? And you will become my Nazgul, and I will control your fate for the rest of time, or until two hobbits and a river person screw the whole thing up. All right. So while all of these countries are experiencing this, kings are all going to have to start shifting a little bit. And you're going to start seeing, especially this military power diffusing. And when military power diffuses from a central location in the hands of the king to more individual nobles, this is going to change not just local politics, this is going to change international politics. Because I'm now going to need to be able to keep up with how all of the nobles in the neighboring countries are thinking. I'm going to need to have ambassadors that are hanging out in all of these different principalities, or all of these different provinces, or all of these different states and all these different countries, so that I can make sure that my needs as regent or as royal of this country are met in my dealings with other countries. And if I can play my politics and get a friend of mine on the throne of this other country by deposing this royal house, so be it. This is going to be very good for me. If I can convince some of the merchants that are in this other country to give me a better deal, this is potentially going to hurt the pocketbook of my neighbor. And I'm going to try to lure territory that's along the border into rebellion by offering military service of my soldiers to help them gain a little bit more of an autonomy, so that they can then align themselves with me and give me better deals. Because here we're starting to play what we might call, the 3D chess kind of games here, where I'm going to have to make sure that everybody on the board, regardless of how small of a player they are, is earmarked with a certain amount of knowledge, and I have a certain amount of ability to predict their outcomes. You start seeing a lot of internal spy networky kind of stuff there's a reason why we use the term Machiavellian to mean these underhanded, sneaky backroom deal kinds of cloak and dagger stuff, because that's what's going on during this time, right? We'll actually talk about Machiavelli here in just a little bit. But these monarchs are going to be challenged, and they're not all going to respond to it the same way. Some monarchs are going to come out of this very strong, like the House of Valois in France. They're going to come out very, very powerful. Some of the other monarchs are going to be just as, if not more powerful, but have different routes to get to that power. For example, the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire. They're still emperors, but they have a different set of politics because of the different way that the government works in the Holy Roman Empire than the Valois family does in France. It's a different kind of empire. It's a different kind of kingdom. So we're all still trying to stay as powerful as we can, but we're all having to play a little bit of a different game now. It's not like the medieval period where the government here looked roughly like the government there, looked roughly like the government in the next country over, where everybody's just farming and we're putting money into taxes in kind, and we are calling up the lords on horseback and stuff like that. It's a changing world, right? Now we have to worry about international shipping rates. We have to worry about fiefdoms along the border. We have to worry about our taxes. We have to make our subjects pay enough in taxes so that the kings, who might not directly own land in big chunks by themselves enough to call up an army, can afford to hire mercenary armies. You are going to start seeing a lot more mercenary army stuff start showing up during the Renaissance period. And again, this is roughly like, depending on when you want to count it, 1200s to 1600s-ish, depending on where you want to go in Europe at the time. It obviously starts in Italy and then spreads northward till you get to, of course, like the Tudor stuff that's happening in England under Henry VIII. I'm going to build a wall, the best wall, the wall that protects us from the Holy Roman Empire, and I'm going to make the Habsburgs pay for it. Except what ends up happening is that the Habsburgs end up getting you to marry one of their 1,000 daughters, and then they kill your grandkid and assume the throne through an older uncle line, and you're dead, which is the way that the Habsburgs ended up dominating most of Europe, both geographically and politically, for almost 300 years, from basically the 1500s through the beginning of the 1800s. But yeah, I mean, the Habsburgs are definitely the bad guys in a lot of people's books, especially if you are a Southern European nation or an Eastern European nation. That Habsburg jawline was impossible not to be attracted to. I guess some of the paintings of these individuals are not what I would call particularly flattering, but if it floats your boat, go sailing. The big here thing that we're looking at when we get into these monarchies, though, is that they're not all going to be the same, and that each one of them is going to be trying a little bit of a different way. Obviously, we still have the Plantagenet family line ruling in England for a lot of this time period, but they're dealing with a different kind of situation than the Valois in France or the Habsburgs in the Holy Roman Empire are, right? They're a constitutional monarchy, and one of the things that's happening in England at this time is they are sort of precursoring a lot of the arguments that are going to happen in other countries between the division of powers. They had already introduced things like constitutions earlier on, and now they're trying to figure out whether or not they're going to stick. At the end of the last stream, we talked about the Magna Carta being introduced in the early 1200s in England, but it's not really until like the late 1300s or even into the early 1400s before people really start even seeing the potential benefit of this and really start leaning into making this be a real thing where the crown really is sort of not necessarily subservient, but definitely not completely over all of the nobles, right? So just because we have monarchies doesn't mean they're all the same, and it doesn't mean that they're all facing the same sort of challenges. And we're going to talk about monarchies a lot. I know that in the last stream I said that we would be talking about absolute monarchies versus constitutional monarchies in this stream. But the more that I looked at it, the more we needed to talk about the rise of different types of governments first during this Renaissance period before we really got to the big Enlightenment debate between absolutism and limited government, that kind of stuff. And I really don't know how I'm going to handle all of that because there are so many things that happen in such a small span of time. We're probably going to do several different streams that are going to look at political changes that happened between the 1500s and the 1800s, because that's just a crazy politically and governmentally active time. A lot of the stuff that we think of today when we use government and politics words comes from that period of time. This is, again, the Enlightenment. It's really, really important. We're going to start seeing early shows of that in the discussion tonight, but not necessarily the big stuff that it's going to really start tilting the scales towards one side or the other. So Plantagenets and Habsburgs and Valois were all monarchies, but we're not all monarchies that are super duper powerful in our own right anymore. If we look at the leaders that had the most individual power, those would almost certainly be the French kings, who are going to have much less limits on their power than the other ones. That doesn't necessarily mean that the French are always the most powerful empire in Europe during this period, but the kings are going to have more individual say-so over what happens within their boundaries than perhaps somebody like the Holy Roman Emperor or the King of England, right? So, just to point that out. Now, we have other things that start popping up. What's up, Uncle Bill? Welcome in. We start seeing this new type of government, which is not necessarily a kingdom, but it's also not necessarily a republic. We typically are going to call these princedoms, right? And the word prince itself is a callback to old Roman stuff, specifically the title princeps, which is a position of a ruler that was first among equals. It's one of the terms that gets attached to the Roman emperors during the reign of Caesar Augustus and then carried forward through that point. So this word prince is originally a sort of generic term for noble ruler, but during this period of time, we're going to start seeing these princedoms or principalities that are going to start developing in really interesting ways. You mean Prince Dumb, am I right? What's up, Tuna? Welcome in, man. So, what exactly are we talking about here? Well, a princedom is an interesting little kind of thing, and it's basically a semi-autonomous demi-monarch. And I know you're like, that's a horrible phrase, you should never say something like that, it's too many prefixes, give me something better. It's one person that rules typically a limited amount of area that is going to be somewhat autonomous, but not completely autonomous. And they might have some level of independent ability to act, but might have other limits on them. So these are not going to be kings. These are going to be people that are typically going to use various titles like Duke or, Archduke or Grand Duke. Duke is a very popular title that gets thrown around a lot. This also goes back to Latin titles, specifically dux, which is a term that came out of a governmental / military rearrangement during the end of the Western Roman Empire and was then later picked up by the Eastern Roman Empire, which was effectively a military governor hybrid kind of thing. So the chief military officer in an area that also had legislative, judicial, and executive power. So these duchies or these princedoms might also be something like a a viscount or a count or some other various title. But the idea here is that these people are going to have a lot of power locally, but they're not going to be kings. They're not going to be emperors. Usually, these individual princedoms are not going to be able to defend themselves against the larger kingdoms. So if the King of France wants to fight any of the princedoms, the princedom is probably not going to be able to handle a fight against the entire French military. If a single princedom wants to fight the entire Holy Roman Empire, it's probably not going to work. If a princedom wants to fight England, if it's a naval battle, it's not going to work. If it's on land, they might be able to hold out a little bit. But we're not talking about places that have enough population to field gigantic armies. But this does not mean that these are not important political players. Because what ends up happening is that when these princes get into these positions, they are forced to develop political relationships with all of these other countries. And you start seeing the rise again of these international ambassadors, international treaties, international trade delegations and all of this stuff, because what we're trying to do here is recognize our position as a smaller semi-autonomous region, but also express as much power as we can, right? We know that we're not on the A list. We're not going to be on the first string of political powers, but can we position ourselves to maximize the ability that we have while not getting squished in the process? And this is always a balancing act, but this is where a lot of political ideas begin to develop because of the urgency of these positions. We can't just play politics as usual because we're not a usual thing, right? What's up, Hellblazer? Welcome in. Does this contrast with the Magna Carta? So the Magna Carta specifically is up in England, and England itself does not necessarily play into the principality game or the princedom game too terribly much, except for when England starts to expand and starts trying to put together what is today the United Kingdom, where it's allowing certain areas like perhaps Wales or Scotland or Ireland to have limited amounts of home rule. The Prince of Wales is still going to be the next in line to be, or I guess Prince or Princess of Wales is going to be the next person in line to the throne of England. So that goes back to the idea that it was a semi-autonomous region that was part of a larger network of power. They could have localized rule where they could do things as somewhat on their own, but they weren't necessarily completely at liberty to go do whatever they wanted to with whomever they wanted to. They were part of a larger network. That structure that's in the Magna Carta is much more going to be interested in relating the relationship, or describing the relationship rather, between the nobility and the sovereign. So the king or the queen that's at the top of the political spectrum, the executive of the political branch, is going to have certain limitations put on them, certain expectations put on them, and certain rights are going to be guaranteed and very clearly enumerated for the nobility. They're not going to be able to be completely stripped of their rights. That's loud. Hellblazer, thank you so much for the follow. And welcome to the adventure. Sold? Well, I hope that whatever happened gave you what I could give you. So for those of you that might not know, if you're just kind of popping in, my name is Shane. I do history and sociology and anthropology at the college level. And while we stream here, normally we're talking about history stuff. Occasionally I'll build a model, and while I'm doing that, we'll just talk history or sociology or anthropology. You can ask me pretty much whatever, and as long as it's not super duper far out of the range, we'll maybe tangent off and try to answer it. So we've got these principalities, and these are mostly going to be in Central Europe, Central and Southern Europe especially. You're not going to see too terribly many of these in England or around the UK. You're going to really only get, well, not only. You're going to see most of these, if we're looking at the map here, especially Italy at this point. During this time period, historically, Italy is not unified. A lot of these political organizations here in Italy would qualify as princedoms. And we'll talk about a couple of these in just a little bit, but there's the Duchy of Ferrara. There's the Duchy of Milan, which is a really big one that's ruled over by the Sforza house. The Ferrara Duchy is the Este family. One of the big ones here in France, which is sort of like, if we kind of look at France, it's sort of like right in here, is the Duchy of Savoy, which is ruled by the Savoy family. They were pretty big players in the larger French scheme of things, and played internationally as well, because they were involved with a lot of the stuff going on down here in Italy. At one point, they were part of the Holy Roman Empire over here, right? So the Holy Roman Empire is kind of a poly-headed hydra that sits over here in what we might call Central Eastern Europe. Andorra, right around here, is a princedom. Monaco is a princedom. So the size, we could talk about this actually. It might be a thing to point out. Just because a location qualifies as a princedom does not mean it's necessarily scaled very big on the land size. Some of these princedoms are quite small, like Monaco. Monaco today is the second smallest country in the world, behind the Vatican. But they were a princedom. It sits right here on the, right here on the southern border of France. They were a princedom going back pretty far, and they were recognized as independent. They were very wealthy. The family, the Grimaldis were the ones that ruled in Monaco, and I think they still actually rule in Monaco. Now, the government of Monaco today is much different than it was back during the medieval and Renaissance periods. But I still think that the titular head of the government is still the same family that goes all the way back to this period of time. I think they've been in power for a good 500-600 years almost. But not all of these princedoms are big when it comes to land, right? The Duchy of Milan at this point has a whole bunch of territory here in the northern and what is today western part of the boot of Italy, and up into the mountains here, and at various times even sometimes on the other side of the mountains. Genoa was right here, but they were a republic, and we'll talk about republics here in just a second. San Marino, and they're not all governed the same either. Again, these principalities have to play different games, just like our monarchs are going to do. One of the examples that we could talk about is Andorra, another sort of microstate. If we put up the borders, it's right here, right? Andorra is a dual duchy, or a dual princedom, right? So we are quite far past Charlemagne. Charlemagne is going to be the late part of the 1700s and the early 800s. Right now, we are looking at roughly 1200 to about late 1500s. Is that Post Malone's son? Andorra? I don't actually know if Post Malone has a son. I'm not sure. But anyway, Andorra here is a dual princedom, and the way that it is organized is really, really unique. It has two leaders. One of them is a bishop, and the way that this princedom was set up is with a political document that recognized that a particular bishop, the Bishop of Urgel, or Urgel, or I think it's Urgel, is one of the titular heads of this. But then there was a noble person, and the title actually got passed around. Sometimes it was one of the local lords. I think they were Spanish for a little bit, and then They got picked up by the Holy Roman Empire for a little bit. Currently, one of the heads of Andorra, the sort of what we might call legal head of Andorra, because it's still technically a dual princedom, is none other than Manuel. Gosh, I can't say his name. Macron, the Prime Minister of France. He is one of the rulers of Andorra because of the way that the political structure got passed down, and then got adopted, right? So, this post-Char... Oh, I see the joke now. I see the joke. Just completely missed the joke, but I see it now. Anyway, so we have a lot of these princedoms, and they vary in size. They vary in a lot of different ways of being governed. But there are a few things that are fairly similar about these princedoms. The titles are probably going to be hereditary in a lot of cases. If we're just talking about all the princedoms put together, they're more likely to be hereditary titles than they are to be elected or appointed titles.
You shall have camels, horses, an armed escort, provisions, desert vehicles, and tanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Claire, for the corgi bits, as always. I still want to try to get a different audio announcement for the corgi bits, or just for bits in general. I don't know exactly what I would do with that, but I need to start thinking about historical things that I could do. I don't know. I ponder things and then I forget, and then I don't come back to it. But anyway, about what was I speaking? Oh, things that principalities typically had in common. Probably a hereditary title. Probably so. Also, probably a fair amount of money, right? If we're just being honest, these principalities are not poor. They're not going to be on the level of like superpower economics rich, but you want to collect these. If you are a monarch, you would like to have a lot of these principalities lining up behind you, especially if they were going to do things like pay you a yearly fee for military protection, or if they were technically part of your kingdom. These principalities typically didn't have a lot of internal noble squabbles, so usually if you're one of these smaller principalities, you might be the only royal family or the only noble family in the principality. If you're in some of the larger ones, you're not necessarily going to be facing nobles. Like if we look at the Duchy of Milan, and this gets us back to the Renaissance, how things are changing. The Duke of Milan was a noble, but a lot of the people that were challenging him, or that were basically trying to keep him in line, weren't necessarily nobles. They were just rich people. Specifically rich people that had trade empires, or rich people that were making products that they were selling to a lot of people and making a whole bunch of money off of this. So as a principality or as a prince, I might not have a lot of other nobles that are clamoring to perhaps take my title or something like that, but I might have a lot of nobles that are expecting me to act in ways that makes them more, not nobles, business people that are expecting me to act in ways that make them more money. And while I might not have to answer to a king except for once a year, or, you know, whenever big banquets are going to happen that I have to show up to, I might have to answer to these business people all the time. And on local level politics, where I'm trying to govern my principality or my princedom, I'm going to have to navigate this new scale of things where the people that I'm talking to aren't necessarily going to be noble by birth. They might be approaching noble by economic status. Principalities pay tribute. Some of them do, Uncle Bill. Not all of them do. Everybody that is attached as a duchy that is directly in line of fealty with the king is expected to pay taxes. But some of these more independent, autonomous duchies or princedoms might pay a protection fee kind of thing, where I'm very small and I don't have a military large enough to protect myself, but every year... Dun, dun, dun. Duncan did it. Thank you so much for that follow. Who just followed? Duncan did it. Welcome to the adventure. Hope you're having a good one. Feel free to participate at whatever level you feel comfortable. So if I'm a really small principality, I'm having to play the politics of, I have money and I can pay you, but I need you to come defend me. And I might be able to hire a mercenary army, right? But mercenary armies were going to be expensive because the people that had more money than me, like kings, were bidding for these mercenary armies in a lot of ways. So I might have to get the cut rate mercenary army or make a deal with a neighboring kingdom to where if somebody invades me, their military or navy is going to show up to help me fight off the baddies, right? But some of them were incorporated into parts of these larger, countries. Like Savoy was technically part of France for a while. Savoy was technically part of the Holy Roman Empire for a while. Like the Duke of Savoy for a while had a position of elector within the Holy Roman Empire, which means that he got to vote for the next emperor, right? So, you get a lot of different versions of these principalities or these princedoms, and that's one of the interesting things that happens during this period is politics just starts spreading out, and a lot of different people are trying to do politics in new ways. And this is going to feed into stuff, and I'll talk about this a little bit more at the end to try to put like a little cherry on top of it. I always like to give the information, and then I like to have the altar call portion of the discussion where I wrap everything together and give you a good, hymn so that you can come and pray if you want. Who grew up in a Baptist church? That would be me. Some would have been unwilling vassals of the Ottomans. For sure. If we look over here in the Balkan Peninsula especially, some of these princedoms over here would have been gobbled up by the expanding Ottoman Empire, especially during the 13 and 1400s. The Ottomans had expanded a lot over here. By the time we get to the 1500s, the Balkans were almost completely consumed. And, this is when we get the sieges of Vienna, where, the Ottomans are knocking on the door to Central Europe. But places like, if you know who Vlad the Impaler is, right? He was a duke of this little region over here called Wallachia, right? Modern-day Romania. Transylvania is not exactly the same place, but it's part of it, right? But anyway, they were right on the border, and they would flip allegiances all the time. If you look at the Kingdom of Hungary, which ruled a lot of this region over here, they were constantly trying to get the little principalities and princedoms in this part of the country to line up with them as Christians instead of with the Ottomans as Muslim. There's a lot of wrangling going on over here. If we go up to the northeastern part of Europe, we're going to see stuff like the Polish crown and the Lithuanian duchy, where we end up forming this alliance here of Poland and Lithuania because of these political wranglings and intermarriages where the kings of Poland end up marrying the nobility of Lithuania, and then because of Russian expansion, they're both going to end up joining the same side, and then because of pressures, they're going to merge together, and you get the Grand Duchy, and then you have all of these different political wranglings up here. All of this stuff is happening roughly at the same time, and all these people are coming up with new solutions to try to figure this stuff out, right? Protection was a vivid way to put it. Yeah, more or less, right? Yeah, the Swiss pikemen. The Swiss are not an organized country at this point. They're sort of just sitting here letting everybody hire them out. Right? When you need mercenaries, you go hire the Swiss. You like the proposals of UK and France joining during the World Wars. Those proposals were somewhat interesting and novel, but were never really going to work. The political structure of France and England was far too antagonistic for that to work. And for those of you that don't know what's going on here, during World War I and World War II, there were some politicians, both in France and the UK, that proposed that as a way to stand up to the rise of German imperialism, what they needed to do was just reunify the country. For a long time, during our current time here as well in Renaissance stuff, a lot of the French territory was potentially held by the English throne, and the Kingdom of England stretched over into various parts of what is modern-day France. So there was a fair argument to be made that there was historical precedent of the countries being together anyway, and because Germany was being such a threat and they really needed to do things, especially like act in unison economically, that it would be better to just merge the two countries together. And there were a couple attempts at getting this done, but it was never really going to work. And I think that the people that were interested in trying to make that happen kind of deep down knew it wasn't going to work. And I think especially the ones in World War II, that the efforts were mostly token efforts, where the British were trying to stand with the French in spirit. But it's an interesting concept in the modern world for that to happen. But I don't think it was ever going to. Yeah, the 100 Years' War was a big mess that happened during a lot of this time period. Swiss mercenaries is quite like the contrast with modern ideas of Swiss neutrality. Yeah, so the only people today that can hire the Swiss mercenaries is the Pope. I don't know how many people watched the was it an announcement? Annuncio, I think, is the Italian word. When Pope Leo was announced to, the Catholic world, but they had the procession of the Swiss Guard, who wear these really garish yellow and red outfits. So must be 100%, I believe. To be in the Swiss Guard, you do have to be a citizen of Switzerland, and there are a lot of sort of particular traditional rules that go into a lot of that stuff. And it's fair to point out that one of the princedoms that existed during this time period was the Catholic Church. This central part right here of Italy for a long period of time was ruled by the Pope. These are referred to in many cases as the Papal States, and they were technically a theocracy where the Pope was the head of the religion of Catholicism, but was also ruling the everyday sort of activities of a large portion of central Italy. So the Pope was a prince in this way. Oh yeah, they've got machine guns and everything. Like the metal helmets and things like that are mostly for show, but I'm pretty sure that even under the fancy stuff, they're wearing body armor. I'm pretty sure they are, but I'm not 100% certain. So princedoms come in all shapes and sizes, right? There's not a one-size-fits-all map for princedoms either. They do giant fondues every day. That's weird enough for me to think that you're being accurate, DCI Banks, and I don't know for sure that they don't, so I can't really call you on that one. But if that's a joke, that's a really good one, because it was delivered just the right way to make me not sure if it was a joke. They're wearing Kevlar bat suits under those gaudy things. Okay, cool. Okay, I suspected that to be the case, but I was not 100% certain. So our kingdoms aren't all one size fits all. Our princedoms aren't all one size fits all. And we're going to bring back an old term here, but we're going to do it in new ways. And that's republic. That's why their outfits have yellow in them. It's to hide the cheese. Mountain Dragon, that makes perfect sense. But I would argue against that because Swiss cheese is typically white and not yellow. So I don't know how to respond to that completely. I like the idea, but maybe they're not hiding Swiss cheese. Maybe they're hiding... Well, see, but most of the cheese in Italy is white. Yellow cheese is mostly like Northern Europe stuff. That's that good Transalpine cheese stuff. When you get into northern France and Germany and England, you start getting yellow cheeses instead of white cheeses. Swiss, because it's holy, though. Okay, Claire. Okay, so you saved it, right? You saved it. They can smuggle the cheese in because it's holy. Senatus Populusque Romanus. The Senate and cheese of Rome. That's Senatus Populus Queso Romanus, right? Queso, by the way, is not the Latin word for cheese. I'm a weird person, but I love it, right? That's the quality entertainment that you're getting here. High quality pro streamer entertainment, right? Anyway, so we have republics. And you go, but we've had a republic before. And I go, yeah, well, we had the Roman Republic, but this is a new kind of republic. And if we look at the republics that are going to be in existence during the Renaissance period, they don't really look like the Roman Republic. They are going to be much different. What's up, Noger? They're still going to be answering a question in the same sort of way, right? The Roman Republic was set up initially, if we go all the way back in time, it was set up to prevent a king, right? The Romans didn't want a king. They don't like one person holding all of that power. They want to dilute the power out, and they want people to have more of a say in the power's usage. And in the modern world that we're talking about of the Renaissance, or the contemporary world of the Renaissance, we're looking here at how we can have that power as a political and governmental entity, but not have a sovereign lord that's going to be, domineering, completely absolutist powerful. How do we do that? Well, the real way to look at this is just to look at the ones that were the most successful. And among them, one of the most successful republics is the Venetian Republic. I thought I said kink and not king, and you were thinking that this was going to go somewhere you weren't anticipating. Well, if you want to look at some of the kink stuff, it's also about power, right? A lot of the kink stuff has, domination positions or sub positions, right? So, I mean, it's all about power dynamics and how we use them and how we allow each other to use them, right? We don't necessarily want an absolutist dom. We have the safe word, right? When it's time for us to chill out, you say the safe word and the dom stops, right? So it's organized, and most of the stuff that happens in a lot of the kink communities involves a lot of discussion among the individuals ahead of time to, make sure that they know what's going to happen and set boundaries and guidelines of everything. You don't go in and just do whatever you want to whomever you want to. Claire, I won't apologize, right? I teach a lot about sociology, right? And one of the things that I teach a lot about is, sex stuff, right? It's a big part of what a lot of people think about. It's a big part of a lot of people's lives, right? So knowing about how that kind of stuff works is not necessarily something that I'm ashamed to talk about. There's an entire chapter in Marriage and Family just on sex. And it's one of the most uncomfortable chapters that my students have to sit through because they're all super uncomfortable, and I'm just up there talking about stuff like it's an academic thing, right? And they freak out just about every time it happens, right? But I mean, it's a part of the world, and if you look at the way that people think and the way that people act in society, it's how stuff works, right? Historically, I mean, it is just an academic thing. I mean, I'm talking about it academically. I'm not giving them advice. I always preface all of the conversations with, you do whomever and whatever you would like. I'm not going to participate, right? Be safe and conversate beforehand, right? So you want to see their reactions? I mean, I've had some people that won't make eye contact with me for an entire week and a half because I'm talking about people that that studied sex. Like we talk about Kinsey, and we talk about Masters and Johnson, and we talk about Freud, right? And I mean, these are people that studied sex on an academic level, and a lot of the stuff that they did really changed the way that we think about stuff, right? So a lot of the work of people like Kinsey, and especially Masters and Johnson, showed that stuff like sex wasn't a psychological issue, right? Freud started with this whole psychoanalysis junk and got a lot of people thrown into crazy houses because they were just horny and wanted to have sex. But anyway, we're so far off topic. This was a very wild tangent from Republic stuff, but I mean, it's all about power, right? Anyway, yeah, hashtag not legal advice. What's up, Girl Forest? Welcome. Do they start visibly shifting? Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, so Virginia Johnson was a female researcher of sexology that worked with William Masters, mostly during the 50s and 60s. And they almost got they almost got arrested multiple times, but were really, really important. And I could talk about this stuff a lot, but that's not what we're here for. That was your diversion into marriage and family sociology stuff. Anyway, back to the topic here, Republic. So one of the biggest and most powerful republics during this time period is the Republic of Venice. And you go, okay, cool, Venice, tourist destination, lagoons, right? Venice was a global powerhouse, and they controlled a big chunk of territory here in the northern part of the Adriatic, parts of a lot of these islands here in the Mediterranean. They had castles all over the place, and Venice was a republic but had the power of a princedom. And Venice was at certain points even playing on the same level as some of these larger kingdoms, right? Venice was hugely powerful. They had one of the biggest navies in the European world at the time. They had the best sea-based trade network of any country in Europe at this time. If you want to try to find a contemporary country that had a better sea-based trade than Venice during this period of time, you're going to have to look at China, like the Song dynasty of China, or some of the states in India, right? That's how big and impressive their naval trade was. These people are super big and super powerful. They made contracts with countries, right? Like they would make deals with countries. The leaders of Venice would sit down at the table with sovereign rulers of these other countries and work out trade deals. These people were playing for keeps. And the guy that was in charge of Venice had the, unfortunately for modern day, title of Doge. This is another derivation of the word dux or duke. We'll call them the Duke of Venice to avoid the modern connotation, rather unfortunate connotation. But the Duke of Venice was not a king. This person was chosen. The title was typically going to be chosen and given for life, but this was not an easy selection for the Duke. It was very complicated. It involved a lot of different leading families of Venice choosing through different levels of numbers and groups. Like this group would choose that group, and then that group would choose this group, and this group would choose that group, and then that group would vote on who got to be Il Duce. Right? So it was selection through a course of lots. So sometimes it was just like this group got chosen by lot, and then they got to choose a group from among them and other families, right? That kind of stuff, right? So you got the position through a republic process, but you did hold it for life, but you were not above the law. You had to preserve existing precedent. You had to honor deals made by previous leaders. You had to try to work to maximize the output of the warehouses that the Venetian Empire was sort of, putting together. You had to basically work towards the betterment of everybody in Venice. Now, obviously, there are going to be people that are going to cut deals that benefit their family or their allies more than others, but you still had to answer for what you did. And if the Doge died, or in the rare case that one would ever step down, the people that chose you, the family members of these big noble, or not necessarily noble, but these big business families, they would get to review every decision that you made, because they were really big on bookkeeping. And the growth of especially bureaucratic bookkeeping during this period of time is astronomical, especially in places like Venice. Every deal got written down. Records got kept for a very long time. There were people who were specialists in notation and calculation that would keep up with all of this stuff. So at the end of your term, your entire reign got scrupulously dug through by people that were not your family. And if you made bad calls, or if you were way too nepotistic, or if you were screwy and cost everybody a lot of money, your family was on the hook for all of the money and all of the penalty, right? So if you had hoped that, I'm Doge and I want to make sure that my son is going to be Doge, you've got to keep people happy. If you screw everything up, there's no way that they're picking your kid to be the next Doge. It's just not going to happen. And in fact, that person's wealth might be demolished if you leave a whole bunch of bad deals behind that cost everybody money, because they're going to pull it out of your pocket to make everybody else equal, right? So you're not a king. You are in many ways a first deal maker among others, not necessarily equals. There's a clear distinction here that they have some level of autonomous activity, but you didn't act without conversing. You didn't act without consultation. You didn't make big deals without bringing it before a lot of people. You were not an autonomous prince. You were a Doge, and that's why they had the title. Let's see. How many people were in Venice at that time? Welcome in, Lumpy. During this period of time, if we're looking at the Renaissance period, probably, I would say between 30 and 50,000. It's a fairly large city. If you look at people living under the larger Venetian sort of imperial presence, tens of millions. Because these people controlled big chunks of northern Italy, parts of what are today Croatia and Slovenia, islands in the Mediterranean, all kinds of stuff. They had big warehouses in places like at that time, I guess it would be, depending on specifically when we're talking about either Constantinople or Istanbul. But everywhere that the Venetians had a port where they had made deals with, there were Venetians living. And that's one of the ways that they were able to make so much money. These people got to sit at the table with the Holy Roman Emperors and with the House of Valois in France and with the Plantagenets because they had that much money. Also, I'm pretty sure I said this. Welcome in, Lumpy. Eat to the two-eye pie. Welcome in. How's it going? Waits for the song about Istanbul and Constantinople. Right. It's a good one. But anyway, so we're talking about, again, this new idea. How does Venice exist on this level? Because of trade. They start off with very little land, but they turn that into a trade empire. That doesn't really work outside of a reference that we have from this time period, right? You don't really see this tiny little thing turning into this big little thing like this, and except maybe if you go all the way back to the classical era, if you look at something like the Phoenicians. But the Phoenicians didn't have the same level of clout that the Venetians had, right? The Phoenicians got squished by Assyria. The Venetians held out a long time and got to tell kings what to do, right? Different situation. So, but I'm catching up with chat. You love the new background? Thank you. It will have shelves and such later on. I'm still working on that. Excel, welcome in. Good to see you. Hope you're having a good one. All right, so that's Venice, and they do their republic their way, but there are others. There's the Republic of Florence. Florence, of course, also in Italy, but also a very big and very important republic. But they're going to be big and powerful for different reasons. Genoa, obviously. We could talk about Genoa a little bit. Also trade. In many ways, the natural enemies of the Venetians, whereas Venice was mostly moving from Adriatic and to the east. So Venice was mostly looking over here. Genoa tends to look over here. Right? So they haven't necessarily halved up the Mediterranean. Venice is obviously going to have more power. Genoa obviously tries to trade with all of these people, but Genoa gets to the game a little bit late than Venice when it comes to making a lot of these deals. And Genoa, while being a legitimate rival to Venice, is never going to be completely the equal to Venice. But Florence is I was trying to pick Florence because it was doing things differently. It was still very fabulously wealthy, but for doing different stuff. And the big thing that Florence was doing was banking. This is something that had started during the Crusade period, but the Florentines were going to be kind of the leaders of a lot of the monetary policy that gets spread through European countries, and they're definitely going to be the model for a lot of the banking stuff that happens. And if you've ever heard of the Medici family, they were mostly wealthy because of banking. Now, this was a bit of a sketchy sort of job, because if you are familiar with Catholic Church doctrine, you are not supposed to charge interest to other Christians. This is called usury, and it was a sin that you weren't supposed to do. But if you charged a person a little bit of money as a convenience fee to move your money around for you, that was okay. And what the Florentines were particularly good at was moving the money around. They're going to start opening banks in a lot of places. They're going to start making deals that allow them to bring a lot of money into Florence And here, again, we're not just talking about money in today's terms. At this time period, we're talking about literal gold. Gold, silver, bullion, physical money that has physical value. And one of the biggest marks of Florence's power is the florin. This is a particular coin that they make, and the Florentine florin becomes a standard of exchange in a lot of European countries because it was backed by the bullion held in Florence. And everybody knew that the banks of Florence were all over the place. Everybody knew exactly how much these things were worth. They had enough money coming in that they didn't have to change the percentage of gold in these coins. So it was very stable in value over a course of a very long time. And that makes Florence incredibly rich. But Florence was another one of these republics, right? The position that's the head of Florence is called the Gonfalonieri. And again, this is just basically like a duke. But the Gonfalonieri is a position that gets chosen. It is chosen by a group that gets chosen by lot. So we're going to pick a group that's called the Signora or Signoria, the rich people. But these are going to come from guilds in the city, specific people that are doing things like fabric or banking or trade of various sorts. The trade guilds, right? We know what trade guilds are. If you were a representative of a trade guild, you got to have a position. And from these people, you chose a group called the Signoria, who are going to be chosen over a period of time with term limits. Usually you had about a 2-month term limit where you would be in charge at any given point, and you didn't really hold on to this for very long. Now, there are some changes that happened to this in Florence. By the time we get to the late 1500s, the Florentine government changes a lot. There's this guy named Savonarola who does a whole bunch of stuff, and there's a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And if you've ever played Assassin's Creed 2 or Brotherhood or Revelations, you'll know about a lot of this stuff. But the idea here is that there were political people that did things, and then they had to change the government because they were jerks. But anyway, usually prior to that, these positions would rotate very frequently. And you got to kind of be a first among equals. You got to have a little bit of power, but you weren't in charge. But to be in this position, you had to have qualifications. We're starting to put not just term limits on these people again, but we're putting qualifications for this. So you had to be at least 30. You could not have gone bankrupt, right? So you had to be a person that was obviously qualified in economics. You could also not be in a huge amount of debt. So you were expected to sort of show your books if you were going to be interested in holding one of these positions. But that's how much the economic portion was driving their government, right? Their power as a republic was in the money that they had, and they wanted to pick people that were good with the money. They didn't want to pick people that had gone bankrupt a lot. You know, like, let's hypothetically say you've gone bankrupt, 7 times, or you've had, let's say, a ton of failed businesses and have wasted a ton of people's money, or let's say you made a whole lot of really bad business deals and then didn't pay people. You would not be considered fit for government. Anyway, but legislation was passed by committee in a lot of these situations, but they had interesting little mechanisms inside of their committees. Some people had positions where they could introduce legislation, but they couldn't vote. And other people had positions to vote on legislation, but they couldn't introduce things. So there's this weird mix of, I get to introduce legislation, but then I can't go vote on it. But these other people are going to get to vote on it, but they can't introduce it. So this encourages people to work together. It encourages multi-party ideology to come up with legislative concepts, because you have to have a person that can introduce something, and then those people have to have people that are going to vote for it, right? You can't just do anything unilaterally, even within the legislative structure of Florence. And this is going to produce a really functioning, very usually smooth running government. This is not necessarily without its problems. Obviously, any structure that's got humans in it can screw stuff up. But the Florentine Republic was pretty interesting. And this is where we get our guy, Niccolo Machiavelli, who, of course, is going to write a very famous piece of literature at this time called The Prince. He writes a whole bunch of other stuff, too, but specifically, he writes The Prince as a handbook for how to rule a country, or how to run a princedom, or how to operate as a person in a position of power. And this is an interesting kind of moment here. We've seen other governmental documents being written before, but this is one of the ones that really catches on. And Machiavelli is an interesting individual himself. He had been part of some of the government. The Prince. Here we're talking about Prince, like principality or princedom. The Prince. And Machiavelli had been in Florentine politics, but then there was a whole bunch of rigmarole, and the people that took over thought that he was hanging out with the people that had been overthrown, so he got exiled, but then he got invited back to be in the government, and then he kind of fell out again. And he wrote this book and dedicated it to one of the leading families of Florence to try to kind of get back in their good graces. It's a really interesting book, but yeah, it basically becomes a governing manual. And a lot of people start reading this as a way to prepare to be a prince. Like, I'm going to one day rule a princedom, or I'm going to one day hope to be Doge of Venice, or I'm going to hope to be one of these big positions in one of these governments. I need to know how to rule, right? I need to know how to think and how to organize my thoughts and how to talk to people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what this book really talks about. Really interesting guy, really interesting stuff. But this book is only possible because of the changes that we start seeing during this period of time, where the old style of ruling doesn't work anymore, right? Everybody kind of knew how military stuff works. The king says do this, and then if you don't do it, the king kills you with the military. But we have differences now, and the Renaissance changes things. We don't just have monopolar absolutist monarchs with all the military power that can just command people to do stuff. We have all of these other different concepts of how to run a government, but that means that there's a lot of different theories about how these people should act, and people are starting to think about different ways that people should act. And this is, again, the sort of glimmerings of stuff that's going to happen during the Enlightenment when people start asking questions like, what is scientifically the best way to rule a country? What is the best way to do taxes? What is the best way to handle political power structures? What's the best way to handle governance when we know that people are flawed? And that bulk of ideology is going to give us a lot of the stuff that comes out of the Enlightenment and the bedrock of a lot of countries that exist today, right? Does the French Revolution inspire others to form republics? So what's interesting here is that the French Revolution is actually pretty late in the game. The French Revolution is after a lot of the big things that had happened. So we already had Venetian Republic, we had Genoa Republic, we had the Dutch Republic, which we're about to talk about here in just a second. The French Revolution is after the American Revolution, right? So we have had a lot of different republics being formed and a lot of different ideas being presented. This is also after a lot of political wrangling that happened in countries like England, right? So this is after all of the stuff with the Tudors and the Stuarts. So the French, yeah, it's the other way around. But what's interesting here is that the reason the French Revolution is so late is because of the power that the French monarchy held. And even from this time period in the Renaissance, which is about 400 years before the earliest murmurings of the French Revolution, even then, the French monarchs had the most power. They were centralized the most. They were most comfortable in their position, and they had the fewest number of restraints from things like a parliament or from things like a constitution. The French monarchs were absolute. And the French Revolution was really a response to the most absolute of absolute rulers. These are people like Louis XIV, the Sun King, right? Louis XV, who even sort of called it, right? One of the most famous quotes that Louis XV ever made, which is also a Regina Spektor song, "Après moi le déluge." Basically, he saw the end of the French monarchy coming, and this statement means, after me, there's going to be a flood. Right? And the French kings of the late 1700s, mid and late 1700s, just wring the devil out of the French population to the point that they finally decide to do something about it. But because the French kings had so much power, it took a long time for the people to gain any sort of traction against them. This is also why they killed all of the monarchs and killed most of the nobility, because they were just so deeply entrenched in power structures. Yes, so other way around, exactly. Even after the American Revolution, the USA was considering getting their monarch. No, so Hellblazer, after... by the time that the French Revolution really started firing up, the Americans had already started working on their constitution that we have today. But the Americans were never really interested in setting up a monarchy. Even the Articles of Confederation, which was the first American attempt at a unified republic structure, just pretty clearly forbade any sort of noble families or regnal titles or royal positions or anything like that. I mean, there are people in America that wanted kings, but they were not the majority, and they were not the ones necessarily like making stuff happen. They weren't the ones in the big circles. You don't hear their names show up in the founding father speeches and things like that. Food deprivation tends to spark uprising. It's true. It's true. What's up, Silver? Welcome in. Welcome in. Yeah, so they had cast off the reign of George III and the oppression of taxation from the British Parliament, and they were dead set on making sure that they did not have that happen again. And to take that one step further and to give you a little bit more specificity, even when they were discussing writing the Constitution over, because there was a constitutional convention, because they recognized that the first document that they wrote, which is called the Articles of Confederation, they recognized that it wasn't going to work, mostly because the country as a whole didn't function. Most of the big decisions under the Articles of Confederation had to be universal. So like everybody, like all 13 or 14 at that point states had to agree. No, Northwest Ordinance had him. Ohio hadn't. Anyway, all 13 states had to agree unanimously, and that just didn't happen because they were too different. So they sat down to start writing a new constitution, and one of the things that people brought up was we need to have an executive branch. And there were people in the room that were writing the Constitution said, no, dude, we don't want an executive branch at all, because an executive branch will lead to tyranny. We need purely legislative power. We can pick an executive of the legislature, but that needs to be selected by the legislature. That person does not have, uniform executive power. Everybody needs to answer to the votes and to the republic. So even when they were writing the article of the Constitution that describes the executives, there were a lot of fights about things like how long does a president need to stay in power, right? Is 6 years too long for a president? Is 2 years too short for them to get anything done? So even the term limits were questionable, because they were like, if we give them 6 years, are they going to be able to cement themselves in that position and us never be able to get them out, right? So even the concept of term limits was debated because some people were like, we need to have like maybe 1-year executives like they did in the Roman Republic. And people were like, man, we've just got too many people and there's too much space. There's no way we can get anything done in a year. We'd have to vote like all the time. Anyway, the Americans were very, very clearly anti-regnal. They would not like how much power the current executive exercises in the United States right now. All of the founding fathers, even the ones that I don't particularly care for, would look at our modern structure and say, man, you have really screwed up what we left you. Do I think the U.S. should have a federal council instead of an executive branch? Static, maybe. But also maybe not. It would really depend on how we voted on that and who got in and how all of that stuff got in. There would have to be a much longer discussion about that. I'm not immediately opposed to it, but it would take a lot of very meticulous discussion for me to just give that, the thumbs up. Also, welcome, Radical Static. Your hot take is that federations put too much power in one person. So federations tend to not put a lot of power in one person. We could actually talk here about the Dutch Republic. The Dutch Republic was a federation. It came around a little bit after the ones that we've been talking about. But the Dutch Republic was a federation. There were 7 counties or provinces or states that seceded from the Habsburgs and declared themselves independent. And each one of them had a local government. Each one of them had a local executive. This is a position called stadtholder, which is basically just a low-level functioning executive, not a prince or a king or anything like that. But each of them occupied their own particular territory, had their own borders, had their own local government. But because they were a federation, they did have a centralized federal government. And what that means is that they met together at The Hague, which is still today the head of a lot of different stuff. And the federal system had certain powers that they could handle, but most of the stuff was held by the individual states. The Dutch Republic allowed for things like international trade, or making treaties with international partners, or doing stuff like providing for military powers and things like that, right? So the Federation in that position diversified the power. Each one of the little 7 territories had its own local government, and because they were acting only in limited federal capacity, there wasn't necessarily a individual that had the power. Let me catch up with chat, though, and then I'll explain how that shifted a little bit. Adams might be okay with it. No, I don't even think Adams would be okay with it. And I don't actually think Adams wanted to be a king. I just think Adams had a really small sense of self and got very offended and then wanted to lash out because he was a baby. This is John Adams, not John Quincy Adams. So President 2, not 4. And for those of you that don't know, Killed the Preacher is my best friend in the world. We've known each other since we were like 4, and we can have whole conversations with like 2 or 3 words at a time. We talked about this stuff a lot. So we have complementary but different opinions on a lot of political stuff. Do they consider term limits of 1 week, making sure that decisions of the executive be ratified in a special bi-weekly meeting? We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer of the week. What's up, Frank Big Time? Aloha, my friend. Good to see you. Now, in the Dutch Republic, this position of stadtholder was an interesting one because each province was able to select its own. So each state within the Dutch Federation got to pick their own stadtholder. Now, over time, what ends up happening is that some of the states in the Federation start picking the same guy. And this is kind of an interesting foreshadowing of what happens in later republics. Because what we have here is 7 different states, and later on they expand to include some people that are in the federal system that aren't states. They have other lands that they get through conquest or through cessation of other places. Anyway, they have this federal system, but if 3 of the states pick the same person to be stadtholder, now you have one person that represents a big portion of the country. And you start getting, and I mean, this is again foreshadowing, you start getting political parties. And there are going to be some people that are going to support this noble family, specifically in the Netherlands, or the Dutch Republic. The ones that are the most powerful are the House of Orange, which is the name of their house before that gets attached to the fruit. Their color was orange, and their family was orange, way before the fruit was ever a thing, right? So the House of Orange gets some support, but then there are other groups that will support other people. So then we end up with sort of like the federal bloc gets split, and we have certain people that want to work in one direction and certain people that want to work in other directions, and then things get gridlocked, right? The same sort of thing actually happened in Florence. For a long time, the Florentine assembly had an even number of people. I believe it was 40. And they got stuck. And then they realized, oh, we've got to have an odd number. And they added 41. Well, they added 1, right? So that they had 41. Because they got this idea that when you start doing republic stuff, you're going to have situations where people can't agree. And a lot of people want to look at the Dutch Republic and go, oh man, that's kind of like a foreshadowing of all the stuff that's happening in the modern world, right? The political blockades of these ideas and what happens when one person ends up taking over all of it. Because by the time you get to the 1600s, it became very common to only have one stadtholder from the family of Orange. And this one person had been selected by all of the politics, all of the individual political units in the Federation. And that made a very interesting federal system because that person technically held 8 by that point, 8 individual positions, but was one person, right? So I'm one person that holds 8 different titles. Do I have to go to the trouble of making the formal decision 8 different times, or can I just say this is what's going to happen? And how much power does the individual federal system have against me if I'm representing all of the states together, and the federal structure is supposed to represent all of the states together? You see how this kind of gets kind of fishy? There's a lot of debate about how much influence the Dutch Republic had on the foundation of the American Republic. And you can find some people in America that say, oh, that the Dutch Republic has got some stuff going and we really need to look at those. But you can find other people that look at the Dutch Republic and go, it's too messy. They don't do things wisely. They have too much muddying of the waters between whether or not this person is a federal representative or 7 different individual local representatives acting in union. That whole structure was known by the people that came to America, and had been witnessed very closely because some of the people that came over, early on, were Puritans, and for a while the Puritans hung out in the Netherlands to get away from the English crown, right? So this is an interesting and changing world, basically, is what we're getting at. And the Renaissance introduces a lot of different ideas, a lot of different ways to get to power, a lot of different constructs of this power, not necessarily just land and military power, but now we have economic power, we have trade power, we have ideological power. And inside of our governments, we have lots of different kinds of monarchies. We have different princedoms that are operating on different levels. We have different republics that are operating on different levels. And again, to try to tie all of this together, what this creates is a structure where the variety breeds discussion. When everybody's watching the same show, everybody only expects the characters to act the way that they know that the characters are going to act. But when you can watch two shows, you can start going, oh, well, why didn't that character do this thing? Because here's another option. You know, our characters in show A responded this way because we know that they're going to do that. But we watched this character in show B faced with the same scenario. They chose a different option. Why didn't the people in A do that? Now we have different models that work. Not just different theoretical models, not just different hypothetical ways of doing things, but we actually now have multiple different working governmental models that have been around for a while, that function, that can produce stability, that can offer futures for their citizenry, that can give benefits to their people. And this is the kind of stuff that people start thinking about and debating. And what comes out of this is an explosion of political and governmental debate. And this big debate is what really fuels a lot of stuff that happens in the Enlightenment. And that's what we're definitely going to talk about in some capacity on episode number 12. Stadtholder would translate to steward. Thank you. Catholics and Protestants splitting the country. Well, during this period of time, well, right after, it depends on when you want to say that the Renaissance ended and whether or not the Reformation was part of the Renaissance, blah, blah, blah. The thing that happens right after this is the Reformation. And you actually see a lot of politics happening within the Reformation. Martin Luther, in a couple of situations, has showdowns with the Holy Roman Emperor. And one of the only reasons Martin Luther survived to continue preaching was because he could hide out in one of these princedoms that was part of the Holy Roman Empire, but not necessarily friends with the Habsburgs, right? And he got sheltered by people that were looking for another way to do politics in the Holy Roman Empire. And one of the biggest gasoline bursts that got thrown on the fire of the Reformation was when states within the Holy Roman Empire decided that if they were going to openly declare Protestantism, that means that they got out from under the Catholic Church. And if they got out from under the Catholic Church, that means they got out from under the Holy Roman Emperor, because the Holy Roman Emperor was backed by the Pope. So I don't like this guy who's a Habsburg sitting on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. So I'm going to support Protestantism, which means that I don't have to pay attention to that guy anymore. And the Reformation was directly involved with politics. Henry VIII declaring that he was the head of the Church of England and creating the Anglican congregation out of his population was a Reformation idea, but done for political reasons because he wanted to divorce his wife, right? And he couldn't get a divorce from the Pope because the Pope knew that if he divorced his wife, it was going to cause trouble between England and Spain, and the Pope had just gotten England and Spain to chill the heck out. So Henry left the church, and when he did so, he exerted political power over the religious ideology within England, got his friend to divorce him from his wife, sent his wife back to Spain, and then basically started a war that his kids had to keep fighting for the next several decades, right? This is a lot of the stuff with the I don't know if you all know about all the stuff that happens with the Stuart family, with Charles being Catholic and running off to France for support, but the Protestants running things in the country, and then like da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da, lots of messy, right? So yeah, the Reformation definitely plays into politics, absolutely. you get that political parties are almost as bad. Well, they can be. Political parties end up forming blocks, and depending on the way that the political structure operates, political parties tend to force people towards polls, right, on one side or the other, especially with the way that voting is done. If it's winner take all, right, if it's majority rules, purely first past the poll voting, you're going to see gravitation towards a bi-party system rather. If you have things like ranked choice voting, you can have a better structure where individual political parties that are not necessarily the power structure parties can exist and even have people elected. But you don't have to. You could just, I mean, like England doesn't have first past the poll voting. England has first past the poll voting, but they also have lots of different political parties. So Washington warned America about political parties, and we didn't really pay very much attention to them. Static says that they wish the U.S. had replicated more of Switzerland. Interesting. What particularly about Switzerland, Static? Like the canton system where you are sort of much more federalized? The Puritans moved around 2 or 3 times before they came across. Yes, they did, Uncle Bill. They did. Dutch were part of the Holy Roman Empire. So, yes and no. The counties that formed the Netherlands were part of the larger Habsburg holdings. They were technically part of Spain at the time that they declared their independence. But Spain's were being ruled by the Habsburgs, who were also the people running the whole Roman Empire, so kind of. You didn't realize it was because of tension between England and Spain. You always thought it was just church policy. So the Pope could give a divorce to whomever they wanted, and it wasn't really common. They didn't really like it, but if they wanted to get a divorce, they would find some way to make it work. But yeah, England and Spain were at each other's throats and had been involved in a whole bunch of fighting on the continent of Europe, and it was making a lot of people really uncomfortable. So you wanted to keep those countries at peace. Speaking of Bonnie Prince Charlie, you got to see the area he hid on in Skye, Isle of Skye. And was sent along his way by Flora MacDonald. Yeah, that's pretty cool. For those of you that, I don't know why you would know this, but KP just came back from a Scotland trip that I am super jealous of. When did ranked choice voting get established first? I don't actually know, Mountain Dragon. That's a great question. I don't know the first place that was actually put into practice. You want a local direct democracy. Okay, yeah. So you would probably choose municipalities smaller than the cantons. Oh, okay, interesting. So you want a much more direct involved local structure. I could see that, and it works as long as you're willing to give up the quality of life that we live in today. If you want the same quality of life that most people experience today, that does not exist without larger scale government structures. Most specifically because people don't live in areas that have all of the things that we need to live our modern way of doing things, right? And not everything is made on a level local to support all local population, right? Like in my state, there's no computer industry that makes enough computers for everybody in my state. There's not a local car company that makes enough cars for everybody in my state, right? So the way that my state exists is because of the federal system, because we have freedom of trade between states and areas, and people can buy stuff here that was made somewhere else. When you shrink things down to a local level, you lose access to goods that are not local goods. So if we're okay with like going back and living more or less an agrarian lifestyle, where we do most of the things by hand, we could do super local level governments. Scotland is nice. I've never been. I would like to go, but obviously I would like to go everywhere. It's just kind of my thing, right? I would like to go everywhere, but I can't because time and money are both things, right? What's up, Nomad? Are you not entertained?
Is this not why you were here?
Welcome in, Don Factorial. Don Factorial, are you by any chance the Don that I know? Because I know that the Don that I know was thinking about changing their name. Okay, cool. You changed your name last night. I knew you were going to do it, and I saw it. I was like, I think that's the same Don. Don exclamation point. Welcome in, Don. For those of you that don't know my friend, now Don Factorial, you should go follow this guy. He does math content, and you're like, I can't handle math content. It's okay, because he'll explain it to you. He's a really cool guy. Also plays games, and has been doing some stuff on general relativity on Saturdays. If you are interested in learning about general relativity. Piggy Master, thank you so much for popping in as well. If you came in with a raid, welcome. Hello, everybody that was at Don's stream. My name is Shane. I am a college teacher. I teach sociology and history and anthropology. Piggy, thank you so much for the follow, and welcome to the adventure. Indiana Jones is here. Einstein is your jam. There you go, Uncle Bill. I don't know if Don's in Knowledge Fellowship, but he should be. I painted the wall behind me. I am in the process of redoing this entire room. Oh, you are in TKF. Okay, cool. I was going to say, if you're not, you should be. Normally in my stream, we talk history of some sort. Tonight, we've been talking about the history of government and politics. We're looking at the Renaissance period of time, where people came up with a lot of new versions of old ideas, if we'll get away with it by saying that. We just got through talking about republics and how the Republican model during the Renaissance changed the game. What did the church think of republics? It didn't like them. It didn't like them at all. The church didn't like the idea of a changing leader. A church liked a single leader that had to rely on the church to stay in power. Right? The church liked a single leader that stayed there long enough for the church to get enough dirt on them to make them do things that the church wanted. And the church didn't like not knowing who was definitely going to be in charge next. So these rulers that might shift, or these cities that might have people that were not necessarily always in charge, you don't like that, because then you gotta get dirt on everybody. You gotta try to figure out who's going to be involved in everywhere. They also didn't like it when those people took the church over. If you're familiar with the Borgia family, one of these super powerful new nobility families from Italy, they basically took over the Catholic Church and bribed their way into the papacy. If you go to the Vatican today and you look at the big church that is St. Peter's Basilica, on the top banner of it, it's like, yeah, this was built by the Borgias. So a lot of these Republican figures didn't sit well with the church. And especially the Dutch Republic they got out from under the Catholic Church pretty quick. They were one of the first fully Protestant recognizing states in Europe. And they were a thorn in the side of Catholicism, because when the Dutch started building their empire across especially Africa and Europe, the Dutch displaced Spanish and Portuguese trading positions, or took them over directly. So Spanish and Portugal, Catholic, being displaced by the Dutch, Protestant. Didn't sit well with the church, especially in Asia, where the church was looking to expand a whole bunch of missions, like, for example, in Japan, right? When the Dutch showed up, they managed to get the Portuguese completely kicked out of Japan. And then there were these Catholic people in Japan that were effectively cut off from the Catholic Church. Catholic Church didn't care for that very much, right? Calvinists, Lutherans, Calvinists, sure. Uncle Bill says TFK is the band. Yeah, 1,000-Foot Crutch. I've been invisible, lurk in TKF for over a year, so Don probably doesn't even know me yet. That's fair, Uncle Bill. I don't chat too terribly much over there anymore. I got in a little bit of a kerfuffle about something, and I just kind of shut up after that. What does the church do to spark Protestantism so much? Oh, that's a whole topic. That's an entire hour-plus discussion. The brief version, they didn't play by their own rules, and when a really smart person called them on it, they got very upset. That's pretty much the Reformation. They said it was this way. They didn't do it that way. Somebody called them on it and then pointed out that they weren't doing it the right way, and everybody got really ticked. That's sort of like the 45-second version of the Protestant Reformation. Why didn't the Europeans choose the Orthodox Church instead? Oh, they were so far distinct from the Orthodox Church that they would have never even thought about that. The split between the Catholic Church in Rome and the Orthodox Church in the other part, or, basically in Istanbul or Constantinople, that happened in the 1050s, right? That was the Great Schism. And by the time we get to the 1500s, they didn't give a crud about what was going on in Orthodox Church, because they hadn't for more than 500 years. They were never going to go that way. Martin Luther had, Luther and Calvin and Zwingli, the early Protestant leaders had not nice things to say about the Orthodox as well. So, it just was not a natural fit, if that makes any sense. They weren't really interested in trading one, what they would consider old and moribund religious structure for another. All right. I think that's probably going to wrap us up for the moment. Let's maybe go see who's screaming, so that we can go do a raid, a bit of a raid. Who is screaming? We raided Nerduino last week. Oh, obvious choice. We're going to go raid Aristotle. Friend of the channel, doing some research with Aristotle, hopefully to get a paper together in the next month or so to present at an event in November. Kyle, welcome in. Hi and bye. So thanks everybody that hung out. KP, thank you for becoming Spartacus. Don, thanks for the raid. Earlier in the stream, we had a raid from Steven Nigerian. Thanks for that raid as well. Thanks to everybody that's a subscriber. You can see their really cool badges there in Twitch, but also we have other people that support the channel. So you can see here people that are patrons. Thank you so much to my patrons on Patreon, and people that have sent me books. So thanks to those people as well. When we get to Aristotle's channel, yell adventure, and if you have any of those adventure hat emotes, you can throw those in chat as well. But until next time, everybody, have a good one, and thanks so much.